Good morning. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're going to turn the page and consider Yah's testimony. Before we do, though, there was a comment in the news that I would like to reflect on. Dan and I were talking about it during the break. It's during the siege of the Nairobi shopping center. The Muslims who perpetrated the attack are videotaped praying. Now, they would pray independently 5 times a day, and you'd have one pray while the other held his AK-47 at the hostages. But can you imagine praying? I mean, dear Allah, there's a cute little 7-year-old over there that I'd really like to rape, and I need the strength to rape her. And her mother, I don't want crying and carrying on, and her mother's really ugly, so I need the strength to kill her. We're going to murder a lot of people here, but we know we're doing your will. Thank you, Allah. Amen. Now, at the same time, the Kenyan government is sending in their security forces, and rather than rid the mall of the Islamic terrorists, they are shown in the same videos robbing the store of its supplies. Yes, indeed. The videotape tells the tale of what has happened to our world. Now I'm going to return to the statement that we were considering in Bereshith. Bereshith means in the beginning. This is first and foremost important. Bereshith is the first word of the Torah. It is Ba is in Reshith means beginning. It has been changed to Genesis to reflect a Greek title of a book that was written in Hebrew. We are now at chapter 3. The statement is in the 14th statement of chapter 3, and it says Yahowah. Does not say the Lord. The Lord is Satan's title. It describes Satan's ambition. Satan's ambition is to lord over humankind. God wants the last thing God wants to do is be perceived as a Lord. That's why he applies the Lord title to the adversary, who wants to own and to possess. Yahowah is under free will. Doesn't want to own anyone. If you want to engage in a relationship with him, he's completely open to that, made that possible, but it's your choice. And once you engage in a relationship with him, you become his children. So in a family relationship, there are no lords. There's no worship. There is no allegiance. There's strictly love. And so God's one and only name is Yahowah. His name is not Jesus. His name is not Christ. His name is not God. His name is not the Lord. He tells us his name 7,000 times in his Torah, prophets, and Psalms, and yet your religious leaders, publications, ever the ones to corrupt God's testimony, replaced Yahowah's name with the title Lord all 7,000 times. Yahowah Almighty is said to the serpent, to the viper, to the poisonous reptile, the venomous snake. This is a metaphor. People have a tough time with metaphors because most people think fairly small. And so for them, it's important to visualize the snake. This was a real snake that was talking to Adam and Yahowah. Now, if it was a real snake, you would have to eat something, and if it eats something, then whatever it's eating is dying, and, of course, that blows the whole mystique of the Garden of Eden from a religious perspective. And if it was a real snake, obviously, the last thing that Adam and Yahowah are going to believe is this lowly little reptile. No, it's not a snake. It's what the snake is a symbol of. Cold-blooded, calculating, dangerous, stealthy, sneaking in, venomous. That's what the snake is symbolic of. The snake here is the adversary. It's Satan. Yahowah allowed the adversary to come into the garden, and he did so because unless God makes the alternative, which is to reject him, credible, or at least appear like it has merit, then there's no purpose for free will. It's as if God stood up in the sky 1,000 times larger than brighter than the sun and larger than the moon, and could be seen at all times and heard at all times by all people, and his Torah teaching were part of our DNA, then there'd be no way to reject him. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but how unlikely would it be? But if God presents himself as just Dad, Father, if you want to have a relationship with me, I'm here. I'll reveal myself to you. I'll prove that I exist through prophecy in my Torah. I will reveal my nature and the nature of this relationship. If you choose to participate in it, great. I would love to have you be part of my family. And here are the promises that I will offer you if you make that choice. But you're also free to reject me. You're free to oppose me if you wish to do that as well. Hasatan was allowed to come into the garden. God allowed this, which means that we are free to reject him. It's not in our interest, but we have that capacity because of the nature of the covenant relationship and God's nature. And so this snake here, this serpent, is a metaphor for Hasatan and for the way that Hasatan is used to create an alternative to God, the religious alternative, the political alternative, the corruption and counterfeit alternative. So Yahweh Almighty said to the serpent, Satan, because you have engaged in this way, you have brought a curse upon yourself. You have invoked injury, misfortune, affliction, and harm, earning retribution. You see, when Hasatan rebelled and said that he wanted to be perceived as greater than Yahweh, that he wanted to be considered God, which is Allahu Akbar, greater than, Allah is greater than, and it was shouted first at Yehudim, so it was greater than Yahweh. That alone would not have invoked punishment upon him. Now, there'd be a consequence, which would be estrangement from God. But the punishment associated with what Hasatan has done is based upon what he did to the relationship between Adam and Chawah, the first Homo sapiens created in Yahweh's image, and in that he deliberately deceived them, corrupted Yah's testimony, to beguile them. For that there is punishment. And Yahweh is about to share what that punishment is. You see, in today's world, if you are religious, there's a consequence of you choosing to be religious, which means you can't have a relationship with God. You have no idea who Yahweh is. You don't know the terms and conditions of the covenant. You don't respond to them. You are estranged from God. You get to live your life, and when it's over, it's over. Your soul ceases to exist. But if you are the perpetrator of religion, if you are the advocate of religion, if you are one of those who is behind the microphone on top of the rostrum or the podium of the church, if you are articulating the message, then there's a punishment for that because you are leading people astray. If you read the billboard that is invalid, there's a consequence if you believe it, if you ingest the poison. But if you sponsored the billboard, there's a punishment. And so what God has said is you have brought a curse upon yourself. You have invoked injury, affliction. You have earned retribution. And he says, more than any class of living being, more than any form of life in the realm, in the open environs, outside the walled enclosure. You see, outside of the garden, there were Homo sapiens, but not with a nasalma, not with a conscience, not made in the image of Yahweh. They were doing lots of rotten stuff. They were scheming on their fellow man. They were hunters, after all. They were those that were interested in accumulating power. Those were those who were creating religious myths. They were doing all sorts of bad things. But no one had been as deceptive particularly trying to ruin the relationship that Yahowah had established in his home in this Garden of Eden between Adam and Chawah. And so what Hasatan did in this case, the adversary, was far worse than anything that had been part of the death and dying that was occurring outside of the garden. So perpetually establishing the serpent metaphor for Satan, Yahowah says, on your belly, which is the part of the reptile which makes contact with the ground, you shall move about, travel, proceed, exist. And dirt, the afar, the minute elements or particles which comprise matter, you shall eat all of the days of your lives, plural. You see, with Hasatan, he is a spiritual being. He cannot die. But he's going to have what is the essence of three different existences, three different lives, if you will. Life one was when he was like all of the other malak, the Hebrew word for messenger. It's just one of the messengers. And then one day he decided that he wanted to not be one of the messengers, not be an implement, but to be perceived as God. And so that portion of his life was over, and he entered a new segment of his life. And during the second segment of his life, Hasatan's role became to deceive humankind and to work with man to deceive other men and women. That is his current life. But he will soon, in the not-too-distant future, in just a matter of about 20 years, he's going to go into the third phase of his life or lives, where he's going to be incarcerated in Sheol, along with all of those he beguiled to work on his behalf. That's why it is lives, plural. And during this time, this life, he is going to consume that which is matter. You see, we are a physical being. We can be transformed through the covenant from a physical being that decays, that is flawed, that is imperfect, to a perfect spiritual being. But it is this time that Hasatan will prey on those who are still physical and will remain that way, devouring them, consuming their lives. We'll return to Shattering Myths after the commercial break. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We're considering the first edict by Yahowah in terms of a punishment, even if you will, but a consequence in some of these cases for disregarding his instructions. He had provided all of his instructions to Hasatan, and Hasatan, for his own self-interest, chose to ignore them, to disregard them, and there's a consequence of doing that. And so God is saying, in essence, for there to be justice, there must be recompense. For a judge to be moral, he must punish those who deceive, who destroy, who steal, who kill. Satan used half-truths, corruption, a straw man, to delude Chawah, destroying her relationship with Yahowah, robbing her of her home, and misdirecting her soul. For that, Satan will be punished. Satan's sentence, however, was not death. Spirits, unlike souls, are immortal. Even God cannot kill them. So that is why the misfortune the adversary brought upon himself, his retribution, will be eternal anguish. Not torture. God's not going to have anything to do with his torture. There will be no torture, just an eternity of knowing that what he did was wrong. Satan will be incarcerated for all but the last fleeting moments of the Sukkah millennial Shabbat that begins 20 years from now and will last 1,000 years. At the very end of it, he will be released. So 20 years from now, he will be incarcerated along with fellow demons and those who have aided and abetted Hasatan through the formation of religion and political schemes. They will be incarcerated. And they will be incarcerated for 1,000 years. Just shy of 1,000 years, they will be released into what is, in essence, the Garden of Eden expressed all over the earth. The entire earth is returning to the nature of the Garden of Eden 20 years from now. God's going to restore the entire world, and those who are left after his return, those who have embraced the terms and conditions of the covenant, will get to spend an eternity with him, but that eternity begins with 1,000 years here on earth, where the entire earth is conditioned to the Garden of Eden. But there will be mortals who will be born to those mortals who begin living during the millennial celebration of Sukkah, which is the seventh of the 7 invitations to meet with God, and during this celebration of the Shabbat. And they too, like Adam and Yahowah, will have grown up in a perfect paradise where everything is positive and wonderful and a celebration of their relationship with God. So these mortals, having known only the goodness of God and his presence in their lives, would have no reason whatsoever to reject them, nullifying the merits of free will. And so just as he did in the garden, to make certain that they made the choice to be with God as opposed to being compelled into it just by the glorious presence of God in their midst during this 1,000-year celebration of God camping out with us. Hasatan will be released, be allowed to come back to the planet of mortals, to consume those who are mortal, so that the choice is valid again. And after deceiving those who were born during the millennial Shabbat, he will be locked up for all eternity. So that is his future. He's going to be released in the waning days of the millennial Shabbat. We'll use similar tactics to deprive those born during this time, causing them to become wrong with God. This will be the final rebellion then for Satan, his fellow demons, as well as those who have leagued with him. They will then be tested and found wanting in what's called the lake of fire. It itself is a metaphor for judgment, for determining that which is consumed, that versus that which is in the crucible found to be valuable. Passing through it, they will find themselves in an eternal prison, known as Sheol, that is described in almost identical terms to a black hole. Black hole is a lightless place that is eternal in time, and in the physical dimensions compressed to the point of virtual nothingness. So it is a prison from which light itself cannot escape. Spirits are akin to light. They will not be able to escape. It is a place where the pressures are so intense, the minute particles which comprise matter are consumed. Ultimately, it becomes a one-dimensional construct that only exists in time. So as we return to Shattering Myths, we will consider the various ways, 3 of them, to interpret God's message to the adversary. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. As we hinted at before the break, there are 3 different ways to interpret God's message relative to the adversary. All of them have merit. The simplest would have been understood by the first to hear the story, that Satan had acted badly by deceiving Adam and Yahowah, and was going to be punished for having perpetrated a lie, particularly a lie relative to God. That's why religion is so condemned by God, why he hates religion, is because it's not like political lies, where in politics the politicians lie to get you to be loyal to or support their government. in a religious lie, the lies are designed to have you turn on God and accept their religion instead of the testimony of God. So, in this particular case, Satan deceived Yahowah and Adam, and therefore is punished. Groveling on one's belly and eating dirt has never been a good thing. Spiritually, the spirit of deceit was cast down, and as a result spends his days devouring mankind. Adam was created from the very substance Satan was predicted to consume. You know, God tells us that Adam was created from the minute particles of matter which comprise the earth, and that was exactly what Satan was now going to consume. There's a reason and a connection that needs to be made between these things. Scientifically, the leading astrophysicist of our day, although he is now in some disrespect in scientific circles, has invested much of the last decade of his life in the advancement of the theory which is suggested here, that matter can be consumed. He has postulated that this condition exists within the confines of black holes. Because it's interesting in a black hole how matter is brought together in with such intense gravitational pull that the three-dimensional nature of matter really ceases to exist, that it becomes, in essence, one-dimensional. And the only dimension then is time. And yet you do see out of black holes something being spewed out of them, but it's not the matter which they consumed. So he has postulated that black holes actually consume matter. Now, while most scientists despise his conclusion, knowing that physics itself is based on the conservation of matter, Hawking is merely reporting what Yahowah revealed. The first thing God said that he will do following the millennial Shabbat is to completely destroy the entire universe. But don't be alarmed. He will instantaneously create a new one, this time with us as witnesses to it and as beneficiaries of it. The prophetic portrayal, which follows, applies to the overall relationship between Satan and mankind, especially as it is manifest in the role of religion and politics and the roles that they have played in beguiling and suppressing people. But it is especially poignant when seen from the perspective of the chosen people. As you listen to these words, think about how Satan's religions, Christianity, Islam, and socialist secular humanism, have all targeted Jews as their enemy. No population on earth has been treated with more rancor, longer, than God's witnesses. As a matter of fact, as I was preparing for the show, it's something that I'll share with you tomorrow as we continue to go through the news on global warming, is that a number of the sites that have sought to identify the fraud of global warming are also the conspiracy types which view the media as being a Zionist tool, and they consider that those who are manipulating the world are all Zionists, and their enemy is Jews. Much of that is satanically inspired. Here's what God had to say. Hostility and animosity, iba, enmity, this deep-seated dislike and rancor, bitterness, ill will, and hatred, will be constituted and established. Sheath will be placed between you, he's speaking of Satan, and the woman, the Isha, the wife. And in fact, Isha, as we discovered and discussed programs about a month ago, is the very thing that Yahowah invites us on 4 different occasions to approach during his 7 invitations to meet with him. He asks us to answer his invitation and to approach the feminine aspect of his light, Isha. Isha is both the Hebrew word for mother and for woman, as well as for fire, which was the symbol of God's light in our world. And so the Isha is our spiritual mother, the set-apart spirit. And we are asked 4 times during the invitations to meet with God to specifically approach and enter her presence. So it says there's going to be rancor, there's going to be animosity between the adversary and the Isha, and between Satan's seed, your seed, he's speaking to Hasatan, the seed of the Zerah, the seed of religious and political deception, of corruption, and her offspring. Now this is her offspring. If God is being consistent here, he's talking about 2 spiritual beings, the set-apart spirit, the offspring of the set-apart spirit are the children of the covenant. The offspring of Hasatan, who is the spirit that we know as the chief of demons, that spirit is demonic. And so there would be incredible animosity between the descendants of the set-apart spirit, the children of the covenant, and those inspired by Satan's religious schemes. But also, if we just look at Hasatan as conceiving religious advocates, and of Yahowah being the mother of humankind, as we know, mankind with a Nesama spirit, one has been the opponent of the other. Now, it does say that the offspring of woman shall crush the head of Satan. So he's saying that the very source of Satan's ability to corrupt and twist, his head, is going to be crushed by the offspring of the woman. Now, the Messiah, the diminished manifestation of Yahowah, did this very thing. And so that is what's being pointed at here. Also, if you look at Abraham, who is the offspring of a woman, his formation of the covenant with Yahowah eliminated mankind's ability, Satan's ability, to estrange mankind from God, at least for those who embrace the terms and conditions of the covenant. If you look at Moshe, who was the offspring of the covenant, he was used to reveal the Torah, also precluding, at least for those who avail themselves of the Torah, who observe it, who listen to God's testimony in it, of being deceived by Satan. And of course, the Messiah, Yahusha, the living manifestation of Yahowah, by fulfilling Yahweh's Torah promises of Pesach, Matzah, Bikurim, and Shavuot, enabled us to permanently benefit from the promises of the covenant, crushing Satan's schemes right at their source, at the head. Then he's speaking to Satan, and he says, "And you shall press down on his heel." Carib is the word for heel, and this is again symbolic testimony. It doesn't mean that the snake is going to succeed by pressing down on someone's Achilles. You know, to understand the testimony, you do have to think, who was named heel? Jacob, based on the same verb, the same noun. Jacob is from Akeb. It just adds a nuance to Akeb, to heel. And Jacob becomes one who supplants his heel. You know, if you really walk upright, if you walk steadfast, if you walk in a straight line, you supplant your heel. It's when you pivot from side to side that you get off your heels and on the balls of your feet, of your toes, so that you can turn going back and forth. But if you're standing upright, and if you're not bent over again, you're on your toes. But if you're walking upright, which is how God wants us to walk, steadfast, in a straight path towards Him, away from human corruption, your heel is supplanted with each step you take. The stronger your walk, the more upright you stand. The straighter you go, the more your heel is supplanted. Yaakov means to supplant one's heel. It also means if you're supplanting your heels, if you've ever been in a tug-of-war, if you really dig in your heels, you can't be pulled off course. Yaakov became Yisrael. Yaakov is the father of the 12 tribes. Yisrael are Yahowah's witnesses. Every witness provided by God in our world was provided by Yisrael. And so by saying here that he's going to crush and bruise soup, he's going to press down upon his heel, he's speaking of the descendants of Yaakov, of Yisrael. And that is where almost all of Satan's attacks, religious and political, have been brought to bear against. Whether it's conspiracy theorists, or religious zealots, or right-wing wackos, or fascists, or communists, they have always sought after, demeaned Yisrael. You know, the protocols of the elders of Zion, completely fabricated, but promoted both by Stalin and by Hitler, as if it were a true scheme that was being perpetrated by Zionists to control the world. And yet the protocols is a complete fraud. What did Hitler do in his fascist rise to power? Rob and blame the Jews. It's what man has done for centuries. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. This is the last segment of the day. It's good to be back broadcasting live. We will continue to consider Yah's statements as it relates to the garden. And the reason we're doing this is because if you want to engage in a covenant relationship with Yahweh, if you want to get to know who he is, what he's offering, what he wants, what he would like from us in return, what the consequences of listening to him, what the consequences of corrupting his message, of ignoring his message, it's all presented for us right here in the garden. Is why this is the second of many stories that comprise the Torah. You know, the first is the creation account. We spent months going through the testimony that Yahowah provided to demonstrate that the creation account, as it's laid out in Bereshith Genesis, is precisely accurate in the order of events, the nature of the events, and in time. Showing that the microwave radiation from the background of the Big Bang demonstrates that time was stretched by 10 to the 12th power, and when we do the math, a 10 to the 12th stretching of time, which is relative and therefore not consistent. It's relative to the observer. To the observer at creation, we know for a fact that time was stretched by 10 to the 12th power, which means that 6 24-hour days witnessed at creation would be 15 billion years. And 15 billion years from a witness to creation is 6 24-hour Earth days. We did that, and then we have transitioned directly from that to the creation of Adam, the creation of Yahowah, the relationship between Adam and Yahowah, and Yahowah and Adam, and then into their fall, and how corrupting and twisting Yahowah's testimony was not only allowed, but it created these consequences. And as we move through this material, we find everything we need to know about who God is, what he is offering, what he is expecting from us, and what he is offering to us. Well, as we analyze this particular statement, this last one, in Bereshith 3:15, we first have to recognize that spirits cannot reproduce. So this testimony here that is being conveyed is symbolic. You know, symbolic testimony is is no less true than that which is actual. You know, the fact that that animals can get together and produce an offspring is less relevant to this story than the fact that demonic spirits can inspire people to get others to be part of their family, to be the offspring of deceit. And that's what's being conveyed here, because spirits cannot reproduce. You know, this notion that angels are pretty little girls is nonsense. They're neither masculine nor feminine. And we use the term he, referring to Hasatan, but he's no more masculine than he is feminine. He's a non-sexual creature. So Satan doesn't have offspring in the sense of sons or daughters. But several places in Scripture, and most vividly in Yahushua's rant against the Jewish religious establishment, for that you can read it in Matthew 23, Satan's little helpers are called, the seed of serpents. They're literally called the seed of serpents. Direct reference to this. That lies manifest lies. They give birth to deception. Just as it is possible and desirable to be born anew from above in Yahowah's set-apart spirit, it is possible to be born from below spiritually, to demons. When a mortal soul leagues with Satan, they become like him, immortal, and thus subject to the same eternal punishment. One way to distinguish these people, and thus avoid them, is that men and women who conspire with Satan often deploy the same tactic that the adversary used in the garden. Humans throughout history in every realm have been crushed and bruised, pressed down by an unholy marriage of cleric and king, using half-truths, straw men, red herring, corruptions, and counterfeits. The seed of woman, by the way, as we discussed briefly, who pushes Satan and his minions down, who crushes them at their source, is the Messiah, Yahushua. But, also to a degree, Noah and his Ark of the Covenant, also Moshe and his advancement of the Torah, also Abraham and the establishment of the covenant. Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. I want to thank you for listening. Look forward to being with you tomorrow. We will continue the story of the myth of global warming as we advance the story of what occurred in the garden and what it means to you and me.